Welcome back to Boring Science for Sleep. If you want, leave a comment with where you're listening from and like or subscribe for more. Tonight, you're stepping onto the boardwalk at Yellowstone before sunrise. As a Geyser Basin ranger, it is 4:58 a.m. and the air has that thin, cold bite that keeps gases close to the ground. You smell rotten eggs because hydrogen sulfide is pooling in the low spots, and fresh mountain air is just branding. You clip on a portable multi-gas monitor, check your radio, and feel the wood flex over boiling water you cannot see. Steam drifts across the trail, and a hot spring that was clear yesterday has turned milky with soft, thumping convection pulses. You take a surface temperature reading, log the change, and try not to imagine the plumbing rerouting under the place tourists will stand. Your job is mostly invisible risk management, gas levels, crust thickness, water temperature, and crowd behavior. So what happens when pressure shifts? A vent opens, and the constraint is no longer your patience, but the boiling point and the sudden failure of a sealed hydrothermal channel. You think the danger in a geyser basin is the dramatic part? You think it is the eruption, the postcard spray, the clean arc against a blue sky? But right now, in the dark, the dramatic part is the quiet. Because the basin is always doing something, even when nobody is clapping. You walk past the closed visitor center doors, past a bench glazed with dew, and you hear it. A low gurgle under wood, like someone draining a bathtub in the Earth's basement. Your monitor gives a small chirp again, not an alarm, just a reminder. Hydrogen sulfide at a low reading, enough to be real, not enough to be a story. You adjust the strap on the device like that changes chemistry. You take 2 more steps and the boardwalk gives you a hollow thump. It is the sound of a thin membrane pretending it is a floor. Your radio crackles once, dispatch doing a quiet roll call. You answer, and your breath fogs the microphone, turning you into weather. Then the first concrete escalation arrives, right on schedule, without drama. Your boot sole meets a slick patch on the boardwalk, and you catch yourself on the railing. It is not ice, it is condensate from steam, carrying a faint mineral grit, the basin's version of glitter. You steady yourself, and you look down through a gap between planks. There is no ground in the way you want there to be ground. There is a shallow channel, and in it, water slides by, opaque and fast, like dishwater in a sink. The heat rises in pulses, and your face feels it, even through the cold air. You pull back, because curiosity is expensive here. You keep moving toward the ranger station at Old Faithful, where the lights are still low and tired. Inside, the briefing room smells like coffee that has given up. A laminated map of the upper geyser basin is pinned to corkboard, edges curled from years of being optimistic. Your supervisor slides you a handheld thermometer probe. Metal scuffed, cable kinked. He speaks quietly because the building is sleeping and because this job trains you to respect pressure. He points to a spot on the map near Geyser Hill. He tells you a feature has been unusual since yesterday afternoon, and unusual is the polite word for misbehaving. He tells you to log temperatures, note water level changes, and watch for new venting. He also tells you, like it is casual, that a thin crust collapse happened last week in a different basin. No injuries, he says. Like that is a permanent condition. You nod, because nodding is what humans do when they cannot control magma. You step back outside and the cold air hits your teeth. You head toward Geyser Hill, following the boardwalk ribbon as it snakes through steaming ground. The steam drifts sideways, slow and heavy, like it has weight. You pass silhouettes of sinter mounds, mineral deposits built one patient droplet at a time. They look like bones that grew out of the soil. You stop at the spring you saw earlier, the one that turned milky overnight. Yesterday, it was clear, blue to the bottom, like a gem. Today it is pale, cloudy, and alive with motion. The surface does not just ripple, it heaves. A soft thump rises through the water every few seconds, as if something below is knocking. You crouch, but not close, because you enjoy having skin. You extend the thermometer probe out over the water, hand steady, arm locked. The heat coming off it makes your eyes water, and you blink hard, annoyed at your own biology. The display climbs, then stabilizes higher than yesterday's logged value. Not by a lot, not enough for tourists to notice. Enough for you to notice. And that is the cursed part. You pull the probe back and droplets flash off the metal, evaporating instantly. You write in your battered notebook, because if you do not write it down, it becomes folklore. Milky appearance, you note. Convection thumping, you note. Slight water level rise, you note, because the shoreline is wet where it was dry. Then, you make your first real decision. You can keep walking your route, pretend this is normal variation, save yourself paperwork, or you can radio it in now before the day begins and invite geology into your morning. You press the radio button, your voice comes out softer than you intend, as if the steam has padded it. You report the temperature increase and the visual change. Dispatch answers with a tired acknowledgement and a promise to flag it for the thermal geologist. You clip the radio back, and you feel the boardwalk vibrate faintly under your feet. At first, you think it is just your pulse. Then it happens again, a deeper tremor, a low boom that rolls through the wood. It is like a door closing far away, in a building you do not live in. The basin is not silent. It is just muffled. You freeze, listening. Because listening is free. The steam thickens for a moment, then thins, as if the air itself is breathing. Somewhere off in the dim, a geyser vents with a hiss, a steady exhale. Your monitor stays calm. Your heart does not. You continue your loop, moving with the careful pace of someone walking across a sleeping animal. The boardwalk curves, and you pass signage that looks cheerful in daylight. In the dark, it feels like a warning written by someone who did not survive. Do not leave boardwalk. Stay on trail. The words are bright. The stakes are not. You approach the rise of Geyser Hill, where features cluster like a crowded neighborhood. Here the ground is a patchwork of sinter, wet sediment, and thin crust. It is also where visitors will be in a few hours, shuffling and smiling. Right now it is empty, and emptiness here feels temporary, like the calm between coughs. You stop at a runoff channel that crosses under the boardwalk. It is warmer than it should be, based on yesterday's notes. You do not need instruments to feel it. Heat rises under your shins, and the wooden planks feel like a heating pad set too high. You take another surface reading, this time on the runoff itself. The temperature is not boiling, but it is trending upward, and trends are how accidents start. You look upwind, downwind, trying to see the basin as a system, not as scenery. That is your second decision point, smaller but sharper. Do you cut across to the junction and check the rope line near the closed area, like dispatch asked yesterday? Or do you finish documenting this cluster first, because something here is changing faster than you like? You choose the basin over the rope line because you are already here, and because heat does not wait politely. You move to another feature, a small vent that normally puffs gently, like a sigh. Today, it is more insistent. The steam comes in thicker bursts, rhythmic. You hold your hand near the plume, not in it, just near enough to feel the pulse. It is hot, damp, and it smells of minerals and eggs and something metallic. The monitor gives a tiny chirp again. Hydrogen sulfide is still low, but it is present, and your brain marks it as a breadcrumb. You log it. Steam output increased, odor stronger, pulse frequency higher. Roughly every few seconds, you have become the type of person who takes notes while standing over boiling poison. Congratulations! The sky begins to lighten, not with warmth, but with a gray softening. Birds call somewhere beyond the basin, a reminder that life continues despite poor judgment. And then your radio interrupts that comforting illusion. Dispatch tells you there is a lone bison near a closed thermal area by Biscuit Basin. They want you to check the rope line before visitors arrive. Make sure the boundary is intact. You acknowledge and you start walking faster, which is a mistake you keep making. The boardwalk carries you along, past features named by people who thought naming things made them manageable. As you go, you pass a spot where the boardwalk splits. One direction goes toward the main viewing area, the other toward the edge where pavement gives up. You take the path toward Biscuit Basin, and the steam changes character. Here it is lower, hugging the ground. It slides across the boardwalk like fog in a cheap haunted house. Except the haunted house does not dissolve your lungs. Your monitor stays quiet, and that is almost worse. Silence from a gas monitor does not mean safety. It means you have not found the pocket yet. You reach the rope line at the closed thermal area, and you see the first sign that the basin has been busy while you slept. The stakes are leaning inward. Not all of them, just enough to look wrong. The rope sags lower than it should be, brushing the grass. You step off the boardwalk onto what is supposed to be durable ground, the kind that has survived many seasons of foot traffic. The soil looks ordinary, sandy, dotted with dead needles. You crouch and you put your gloved hand near the base of a stake. The ground is warm, not sun warm, body warm, but deeper, as if something underneath is holding heat like a secret. You pull your hand back, you look around for other clues, because the basin does not always crack where you are staring. Vegetation, you think. Green plants are a heat map. Where things are too hot, plants stop negotiating and leave. Here, the grass is patchy, and some areas look bleached, as if cooked. You follow a faint line of dead vegetation, and you see it. A hairline crack in the soil, new, thin, and damp. Steam threads out of it in a delicate ribbon, almost pretty. You watch it for a moment, and you feel the urge to lean closer. Then you remember what you are. You are a bag of water and fat, wrapped in skin. You do not belong near vents that are writing new rules. You step back onto the boardwalk and you take out a small flag marker from your pocket. You do not place it in the ground near the crack, because that requires approaching the crack. Instead, you mark it from a safer angle, on a stable edge. You reposition the rope line without stepping into the warm patch, using the boardwalk as your platform. You pull the sagging rope tighter, anchor it to a new stake location. Farther back, the rope now encloses more space, a larger no-go zone. It will annoy visitors. It will maybe keep them alive. Your radio crackles again. A maintenance crew is on their way, but they are still far. You report the leaning stakes, the warm soil, the new steaming crack. Dispatch tells you to document it and return toward the main basin. You comply because you are not paid to argue with geology or supervisors. As you turn to leave, you hear a faint crunch. It comes from somewhere just off the boardwalk, under the dry-looking soil. It is a brittle sound, like stepping on thin ice. You did not step there, which means something else did. You look and you see the bison. It stands near the rope line, head low, steam curling around its legs. It looks calm, because bison do not understand hydrothermal systems. Or maybe they do, and they just do not care. It takes one slow step. The ground holds. It takes another. The ground holds again, but you see a slight sink, a subtle give. Your stomach tightens. You raise your voice, not at the bison, because you cannot negotiate with it. You clap once, loud in the fog, trying to make it move away from the warm patch. The bison lifts its head, unimpressed. It snorts, sending a cloud of vapor into the cold air. Then, blessedly, it turns and ambles away, back towards safer ground. You exhale, realizing you are holding your breath like that matters. You return along the boardwalk, and the basin seems louder now. More hissing, more gurgling. The soundscape has thickened, like the system is shifting into a higher gear. The sun finally edges up, pale behind steam, and with light comes the first humans. A jogger, too early, breath steaming, earbuds in. You want to tell them that earbuds are an insult to a place like this. Instead, you watch them stay on the boardwalk, and you let them pass. You reach back toward the area near the Milky Spring, because you need to update your supervisor. As you approach, you see that the milky water is higher than it was an hour ago. The shoreline has crept outward, wetting mineral crust that was dry. The thumping convection pulses feel stronger, visible now, pushing cloudy water up in domes. You take another reading. The temperature has inched up again. You radio in the update, and you hear your own voice, sounding more controlled than you feel. Your supervisor answers, telling you to stay near the junction as visitors arrive. Keep an eye on crowd behavior, he says, and keep an eye on that feature, because geology is on their way. You glance at the boardwalk junction, where multiple paths meet. This is where people stop. This is where they tie shoes, hand snacks to children, and step sideways without looking. This is where accidents happen, because humans treat wooden planks like sidewalks. The light strengthens. Steam glows. The basin begins to look, briefly, like something gentle. Then you feel another underground boom, softer than the first, but closer. It rolls up through the soles of your boots, a pressure wave you feel in your teeth. A few birds startle into flight. The milky spring answers with a sudden larger heave, as if it heard the boom too. Water surges up against its rim, then settles. You do not have a dramatic eruption, not yet. What you have is movement, subtle but steady, like a pot beginning to simmer. You stand at the junction and watch the first wave of visitors filter in. It is still early, so the crowd is thin, but it has the energy of anticipation. They are here to see Old Faithful. They are here for predictability in a place built on pressure. A family approaches, parents in matching jackets, a child swinging a water bottle. They slow near the milky spring because cloudy water reads as interesting. You step slightly into view, not blocking, just present. You say calmly that the area is being monitored and to stay on the boardwalk. They nod, half listening. The child leans over the railing. You watch their small fingers grip wood damp with condensate. You ask them, gently, to step back. The parent pulls them in without complaint. Small victories. Your gas monitor chirps. A little sharper now. You glance down. The hydrogen sulfide reading is still not high, but it is rising. The air is cold, and the gas is heavier than air, pooling low. Steam is not just water vapor. It is a moving curtain that can hide pockets of bad air. You shift your position upwind, subtly, like a chess move. A couple stops nearby to take photos, and you notice the woman cough once, just once, a small throat clear. Maybe it is the cold. Maybe it is the gas. You watch for a second cough. It does not come. Still, you keep them moving with a polite suggestion. You angle your body so the breeze hits your left cheek first, and you pretend it is just good manners. Your eyes stay on the little digital screen clipped to your chest because it is the only friend here that tells the truth. The crowd thickens in slow pulses, like the basin is inhaling tourists on a schedule. A stroller wheel thumps the boardwalk seam, and the wood answers with its own hollow complaint. You hear laughter, then the plastic crinkle of snack wrappers, then the soft, wet cough of steam condensing in hair. Someone says it smells like a fart. Someone else says it smells like nature. You let them have both explanations because both are correct and neither is helpful. You take 3 steps toward the milky springs railing and the air warms against your shins. It is a localized warmth, like standing near an oven door someone cracked open without asking. The water in the springs surges again, a dome rising, then collapsing, as if the whole pool is trying to swallow. You stare at the surface for a long beat, waiting for a pattern. You get one anyway. Thump, pause, thump, shorter pause, thump. You are not watching water, you are watching pressure negotiate. You lift your radio, thumb hovering, because calling it in again feels like whining. Then, the runoff channel beside the boardwalk betrays it. A thin ribbon of water that used to glide quietly now shivers, tiny bubbles snapping at the surface. It is not boiling. It is degassing. It is releasing dissolved gases as the water warms and pressure changes. It is the hydrothermal system, burping without apology. You press the radio button and speak in the calm tone you reserve for situations that might kill someone. You report increased venting in the milky feature and hotter runoff and rising hydrogen sulfide. Dispatch replies with the verbal equivalent of a shrug. and tells you the thermal geologist is en route. You look at the boardwalk junction again. People keep pausing at the exact narrowest point because humans are consistent in the worst way. You start doing crowd control the only way you can, with small phrases and gentle body placement. You ask one group to keep moving, and you direct another to stand on the wider platform farther ahead. You make it sound like a suggestion because the boardwalk is not built for panic. A teenager leans over the railing with a phone extended, trying to film the milky surface. You imagine their sleeve catching the rail, their center of gravity shifting, their arm dipping into water that will remove skin like wax. You tell them, softly, to step back. They roll their eyes, but they step back. Congratulations, you have saved someone from an extremely educational burn. The basin chooses that moment to remind you it is not impressed. A low vibration runs through the planks, so subtle you feel it more in your ankles than your ears. The sound is like a distant truck passing on a road you cannot see. But there is no road under you. There is only rock and water and heat and fractures that open and seal like throats. You watch the milky spring. The surface tightens, like a muscle tensing under skin. A larger heave rises higher than the previous ones, and the pale water slaps against the mineral rim. A few tourists gasp delighted, as if they are watching a dolphin. You are watching a pressure vessel flirting with failure. Your gas monitor chirps again, sharper, and you feel your scalp prickle with irritation. Not fear, exactly. More like the annoyance of being trapped in a job where the air can turn into a problem. Hydrogen sulfide is heavier than air, and in cool morning conditions, it pools low. It does not rise dramatically like smoke. It waits for you like a bad opinion. At low concentrations, it smells like rotten eggs. At higher concentrations, it paralyzes your sense of smell, which is a thoughtful feature if you enjoy surprises. You shift your stance again, upwind, and you start watching the people for signs that matter. Watery eyes, headaches, nausea, confusion, not because the basin is dramatic, but because the human body is predictable. You see an older man rub his eyes and blink hard. You see a child complain about the smell. You see a woman inhale deeply, like she is trying to absorb the experience, and then cough twice. 2 coughs. That is your threshold. You walk toward them, keeping your voice low and even. You tell them to move a bit farther along the boardwalk, where the breeze is cleaner. They comply, mostly because your uniform makes it sound like a fact. You keep scanning because the real hazard is not the feature itself. It is the crowd turning into a cluster at the wrong time. A small group asks you if the spring is changing color because of algae. You give them the unromantic version. You tell them heat, acidity, and chemistry control what lives here, and the colors can shift when the water source shifts. You say it like you are describing plumbing, because you are. You avoid the word eruption because the human brain hears that word and starts filming instead of thinking. Then you hear it, not the boom under your feet, a different sound, a sharp, wet crack like someone snapped a thick branch, followed by a breathy roar. Your head turns before you decide to turn it. Off to the side, beyond the boardwalk and past the rope line, steam thickens abruptly. It billows from a spot that was quiet a minute ago. The plume is not tall, not cinematic. It is dense and angry, hugging the ground at first, then surging upward in a tight column. You feel the heat wash across your face. Even from this distance, the air shifts and your monitor chirps in quick succession. Your brain runs the math without asking permission. New venting, fresh gas release, unstable ground nearby. A family near the junction points and laughs, thinking it is a scheduled show. You walk fast, but not so fast you slip on wet wood. You raise your voice, not shouting, but firm enough to cut through chatter. You tell people to keep moving, and you point them away from the spur that leads closer to the plume. You are not evacuating yet. You are preempting the cluster, because the cluster is what turns a hazard into a casualty list. The steam column pulses again, and this time you see debris. Small, dark flecks arc up and fall back. Not much, but enough. It is not just steam. It is water and sediment being forced up through a constriction. Hydrothermal eruptions are not magma eruptions. They are plumbing failures. They are when superheated water flashes into steam as pressure drops, expanding violently, shattering the rock and mud that contain it. Water expands to about 1,700 times its volume when it becomes steam. That is a number you do not need to memorize. You can feel it in the way the plume punches upward and in the way the boardwalk trembles faintly, like it resents being involved. You radio dispatch, voice steady, because you do not want your adrenaline to infect the entire network. You report fresh venting off trail near the monitored feature. You request another ranger to assist with crowd control at the junction. Dispatch answers faster now. They tell you to initiate a temporary closure of the spur. They tell you medics are on standby, which is a lovely phrase that means nothing until it means everything. You turn back to the visitors, and you become the least popular person in the basin. You step to the entrance of the spur and plant yourself there, shoulders squared, hands open. You tell people the area is temporarily closed due to increased hydrothermal activity. A man with a camera asks how long it will be closed, as if you are holding a meeting with the ground. You tell him you do not know. He frowns like you have failed at customer service. A teenager tries to slip around you because rules do not apply when your phone battery is above 50%. You shift one step, blocking without touching, and you make eye contact. You tell them, quietly, that the ground can throw boiling water without warning. They pause, recalculating. They decide their shoes are worth keeping. They back away. Behind you, the steam plume off trail surges a third time. This one is louder, a harsh guttural roar, like a giant kettle ripping itself apart. The sound hits the crowd, and you watch the emotional wave move through them. First excitement, then confusion, then that thin edge of fear that makes people finally listen. The boardwalk shudders, not dramatically, but enough that a few people grab the railing. A child starts crying, not because they know what is happening, but because the adults around them suddenly changed posture. You keep your voice low, almost soothing. You tell people to move calmly to the wider platform. You tell them not to run. You tell them to hold the rail if they feel unsteady. You keep the cadence steady because your voice is the only stable surface right now. Then the basin escalates. The off-trail vent does not just puff, it erupts. A sudden blast of steam and water, violent and fast, throwing a fan of scalding spray and small rocks. The plume leaps higher, dense and white, and for a split second you see brown mud mixed into it. The sound is a cannon muffled by fog. Heat hits your face like opening an oven at full blast. You flinch because you are still an animal. The crowd gasps, then surges backward in one messy motion. Wooden boards creak under shifting weight. Someone stumbles, and you catch their elbow, steadying them without thinking. Congratulations, you have become a human handrail. The spray does not reach the boardwalk, not this time, but the air carries fine droplets, and they sting your cheeks like hot rain. A woman yelps and wipes her forearm, skin reddening, not a severe burn, but enough to remind everyone that the atmosphere here is not decorative. Your gas monitor screams, a rapid alarm that is no longer polite. Hydrogen sulfide spikes briefly, then flickers down, then spikes again. The new vent is exhaling whatever the underground system has been storing. You do not stand there debating thresholds. You move people. You point them upwind, away from the low areas where gas can pool. You widen the exclusion zone with your body and your voice, because tape is not deployed yet. Another ranger arrives at the junction, jogging with the awkward urgency of someone trying not to trip over catastrophe. You exchange a glance, and in that glance, you trade an entire plan. They take the crowd stream, guiding people back along the main boardwalk. You move closer to the closure point, checking for anyone frozen in place, filming. There is always someone filming. A man holds his phone up, eyes wide, transfixed. You step beside him and speak close enough that he hears you over the roar. You tell him to move now. You do not ask. He blinks, then shuffles backward, still recording, because humans document danger as a coping mechanism. The vent erupts again, smaller this time, but still violent. A chunk of dark rock arcs up and lands with a wet slap in the mud. You watch its trajectory and feel your stomach clench. Even small rocks can crack skulls. The boardwalk is a safe zone only if the eruption stays off trail. And eruptions do not sign agreements. You radio again, voice clipped now. You report a hydrothermal eruption off trail with debris. You request immediate closure, expansion, and medical response for minor scald injuries. Dispatch acknowledges, and you hear urgency in their tone. They tell you law enforcement rangers are heading your way, along with the thermal geologist. You look at the crowd. Most are moving, guided by the other ranger, but a few linger at the boundary, hungry for spectacle. You understand the impulse. The human brain loves a story where nature performs, but nature is not performing. It is venting pressure because physics demands it. You step forward and raise your voice, firm, cutting through curiosity. You tell them the area is closed and they must move back. A woman complains that she has been planning this trip for months. You tell her, with calm sincerity, that the basin has been planning this eruption for longer. She does not laugh. She moves anyway. You start laying out cones and tape from your pack, working fast but methodical. You anchor tape to posts, to railings, to anything that will hold. The tape flutters in the warm breeze like a pathetic barrier against geology. But it is not the tape that matters. It is the line in the mind. You widen the exclusion zone beyond what feels comfortable to the crowd, because debris can travel, because gas can drift, because the ground can open somewhere adjacent, and you do not want a cluster standing on the wrong plank. You keep glancing at the vent site. Each eruption is slightly different. One is mostly steam. One is steam and muddy water. One throws pebbles. You are watching a system search for a new equilibrium by trying several ways to fail. Your skin feels tight on your face. Where droplets hit, your eyes sting, partly from steam, partly from the faint bite of sulfur compounds. Hydrogen sulfide is toxic because it interferes with cellular respiration. It binds to enzymes in your mitochondria, the little power plants in your cells, and tells them to stop doing their job. At low levels, you get irritation and headaches. At higher levels, you get confusion, collapse, and a kind of quiet death that looks like sleep. It is not poetic. It is chemical. Your monitor alarms again, then eases. The breeze shifts, dispersing the gas. You take advantage of the brief reprieve to check on the woman with the reddened forearm. You ask her if she has pain, if the skin blistered, if she has trouble breathing. She looks startled that you are treating her like a person and not a complaint. She says it stings. You tell her to rinse with cool water when she can, and you radio for medics anyway, because I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that request. Because minor burns have a way of becoming major complaints. Once the adrenaline fades, and because you have learned the hard way that tourists do not report symptoms until the gift shop, you guide her toward the upwind side of the boardwalk, where the air is less ambitious. You keep your body between her and the low fog because the gas hugs the ground like it owns it. Your monitor quiets for a moment, and you do not trust the silence. The vent off-trail coughs again, shorter, wetter, like a throat clearing before it speaks. A thin spray drifts out, and you feel it as warm pinpricks on your knuckles. You look down at your gloves, and the moisture steams off almost immediately. That is how close you are to boiling, without ever seeing a bubble. You wave the woman onward, and you make a second call for medics, because redundancy is your only luxury. You glance back at the crowd line, and you see the same expression on a dozen faces. They want to know if it will happen again, and they want to know if it will happen on schedule. You give them the most honest answer you have. You tell them it is not a show and it does not rehearse. Someone laughs nervously, like you told a joke. You do not correct them, because nervous laughter still moves feet. The other ranger holds the main flow, steadying people like a human traffic cone. You work the tape line wider, anchoring it to a railing post, then another. Each time you pull the tape tight, it flutters anyway, offended by your confidence. You take one step back to check sightlines, and the boardwalk creaks under you. Not a warning creak, just the tired complaint of wood sitting over an ecosystem that would prefer lava. You look past the tape at the new vent. The ground around it is darker now, wet with thrown water. Mud spatters the pale sinter like fresh bruises. A small ridge has collapsed into a shallow crater, and steam pours out of the new opening. It is already reshaping itself, minute by minute, as if the earth is editing. You hear footsteps, quick and deliberate. Law enforcement rangers arrive, faces set in that professional calm that means they are doing math too. They take positions at the junction, and the crowd finally stops testing the boundary. Not because the hazard got worse, because the uniforms, multiplied. Congratulations, you are working with the one force more persuasive than boiling water. One of the law enforcement rangers asks you what happened, and you give the clean version. Off-trail hydrothermal eruption, you say. Scalding spray, minor injuries, gas reading spiked, closure established. You do not add the part about how the ground sounded like it was exhaling through broken teeth. He nods, already thinking about incident reports and camera footage requests. In the distance, over the heads of everyone you are managing, Old Faithful keeps doing its dependable thing. A white plume rises on schedule, and the crowd reflexively turns to watch. Predictability is intoxicating, even when it is happening next to chaos. You use that moment, when heads are turned, to scan for stragglers. There is always one person hovering near tape, pretending they cannot read. You spot him, a man with a bright rain jacket and a brighter sense of entitlement. He points his camera toward the new vent, stepping closer to the boundary. You move toward him at a brisk walk, not running. Running makes people run, and running on wet planks is an audition for gravity. You stop at conversational distance, and you tell him the closure is not negotiable. He asks, with genuine confusion, if he can just go a little past it. You look him in the eye and speak slowly, like he is a tired animal. You tell him that steam can be hotter than boiling water, and it does not look hot. You tell him that the ground crust can be thinner than his shoe sole. You tell him that if it collapses, he will not have time to regret the photo. He scoffs, but he steps back because even optimism has survival instincts. Behind you, your monitor chirps again, then settles. The breeze shifts, and you feel relief like a weak pulse. The vent quiets too, shrinking from cannon to kettle. Steam continues, but the violent bursts slow. This is the part where people decide it is safe again. This is the part where you become unpopular twice. You keep the closure in place because the system does not stop being unstable just because it paused. Hydrothermal eruptions often happen in clusters, like aftershocks, or like a plumbing system burping repeatedly after you cleared one clog. The underground water is still hot. The fractures are still open. The pressure is still redistributing. And redistribution is not the same as calm. You check in with dispatch again, giving updated gas readings and crowd status. You ask for the thermal geologist's estimated arrival, and the reply is vague. They are on their way, you are told, as if the basin cares about traffic. You look at the new vent site again, and you try to read it like weather, steam density, sound, color of runoff, direction of drift, the way the mud is piling, the way water is cutting new little channels downslope. Speaking of channels, you notice something that makes your throat go tight. The runoff that used to flow gently away from the area has shifted. It is carving toward a low spot closer to the boardwalk. Thin but purposeful. Water always takes the easiest route, and the easiest route is rarely the safest. You walk along the boardwalk, tracking the runoff's new path from above. The water is cloudy now, carrying fine sediment. Tiny bubbles pop along its edges, and the channel's surface shimmers with heat. You hold the thermometer probe close, and even without dipping it, you feel warmth radiating. You do dip it carefully, a few inches into the flow. The reading climbs fast, and it is hotter than the channel was earlier. Not boiling, but trending, always trending. You log it because trends are your whole life now. You radio your supervisor with the update, emphasizing the runoff's direction. He tells you to keep the closure wide and to wait for the thermal team. You glance at the visitors again. Some are still filming the steam plume, even though it is mostly a steady hiss now. They want drama. They want a story with a clean middle and an ending they can post. You do not have an ending. You have a basin that rearranges itself in ways that are not obligated to be narratively satisfying. The medics arrive, weaving through the boardwalk traffic with practiced patience. You hand off the woman with the reddened forearm, giving the medic a quick summary. Possible scald from fine spray, you say. No breathing difficulty observed, but monitor spiked. Keep an eye. The medic nods, and the woman looks suddenly more anxious now that medical attention is real. You tell her she did the right thing by moving upwind. It is the closest you get to encouragement. You turn back toward the closure line because the crowd has the attention span of a moth. A child asks if the geyser is angry. The parent laughs like it is cute. You answer anyway, because small brains deserve truth too. You tell the child it is not anger, it is hot water turning into steam, and the steam wants more space. The child stares at you, unimpressed, because you did not give it a face. Fair. Your radio crackles again, and this time it is the thermal geologist. She is approaching from the main loop with a small team and equipment. You feel a kind of relief that is also annoyance. Relief that someone with a doctorate is coming. Annoyance because the basin does not care about degrees, only temperatures. You spot them a few minutes later, moving carefully along the boardwalk. Hard hats, backpacks, a case that looks like it holds instruments too expensive for optimism. The geologist meets you at the tape line, and you give her the condensed timeline. Milky Spring changed before dawn. Temperature up, water level up, thumping stronger, underground booms felt, gas readings rising. Then, off-trail venting. Then, eruption with debris and spray. She listens without interrupting, which is how you know she is used to bad news. She asks about the smell, and you tell her the rotten egg odor was stronger after the eruption. She nods, eyes scanning the steam like she is reading text. Hydrogen sulfide, she says, mostly to herself. Then she asks if the wind has been consistent. You tell her it has shifted a few times, and you point out the low spots where gas pooled earlier. She nods again, and she looks at your monitor readings. She does not smile. That is comforting in a grim way. Her team begins setting up, staying on permitted routes, because even scientists do not want to become data points. They take infrared readings, holding a sensor over the railing to map surface temperature variations. They lay a small seismometer on a stable patch near the boardwalk, fastening it down. You watch their careful hands, and you realize this is what passes for control here. Measuring the monster's breath. The geologist asks if anyone went off trail during the incident. You tell her you prevented it, but you cannot guarantee nobody did before you arrived. She makes a note, then looks at the new vent. Steam still rises, steady. The crater edges slump slightly as wet mud slides inward. She watches the slumping, then says something that lands heavy. This looks like a shallow hydrothermal explosion crater, she says. Small, but it indicates pressure was trapped and released suddenly. You ask what that means for the surrounding area, and she gives you the honest version. It means the plumbing has changed, she says. It means pathways opened and others may have sealed. It means nearby features can change quickly, including ones under boardwalks. She says it gently, like telling you the weather is turning. You stare at the wooden planks beneath your boots. You think about how many people will cross them today. You ask if there is a way to predict where the pressure will go next. She gives you the science answer and the human answer. Science answer? She says, we look at heat flow, gas emissions, deformation, and seismicity. Human answer. She says, we guess and we keep people away from the worst places. Congratulations, you are back to probability management. Her team begins to follow the runoff channel direction, eyes on the water like it is a gossiping neighbor. You escort them, staying inside permitted corridors, watching for visitors drifting toward the tape. Every few steps, someone asks you what happened. You deliver the same unpoetic explanation over and over. Hot water under pressure found a new route, you say. Pressure dropped. Water flashed to steam. Expansion through debris. It is plumbing, not prophecy. Some visitors nod and accept it. Others look disappointed because plumbing is not as spiritual as they hoped. You follow the thermal team toward the milky spring you flagged earlier. It is still milky, still heaving, but now the motion is more chaotic. Instead of rhythmic thumps, the surface makes irregular bulges. A bubble dome rises, holds for a second, then collapses with a wet slap. The geologist takes one look and steps back. Cautious, she holds the infrared sensor out, and its screen shows bright patches near the vent edge. Hotter zones, closer to boiling. She points to the pattern, explaining as she works. If the water source is changing, she says, the chemistry can shift fast. The milky color can be suspended silica, or fine sediment, or precipitates forming as temperature and pH change. She says pH, then adds acidity for humans. You appreciate the translation. She has done this before. Her team takes gas measurements downwind using a handheld detector with a small intake tube. The numbers flicker, and you watch their faces instead of the display. Faces tell you more than screens sometimes. They look focused, not alarmed, but not relaxed. The geologist tells you the hydrogen sulfide levels are still low enough for brief exposure, but spikes are possible near ground level. She tells you to keep people moving. Avoid letting anyone linger in low depressions. You do not need to be told twice. You look out across the basin, now bright in full morning light. It looks beautiful in the way that weapons can look beautiful when polished. Steam plumes rise from dozens of vents. Water glitters in pools that would cook a hand in seconds. Sinter terraces shine white like spilled salt, and underneath it all, a hydrothermal system circulates thousands of gallons through fractures, dissolving minerals, depositing others, building and breaking its own pathways. A visitor asks if Yellowstone is going to erupt, meaning the big eruption. The question always arrives like a bad penny. You answer with the same practiced realism. This is hydrothermal activity, you say. Not magma reaching the surface, not a volcanic eruption. But it is still dangerous because hot water is enough. The visitor looks unsatisfied, as if you denied them apocalypse. You consider apologizing for the universe's refusal to be cinematic on demand. You do not. The thermal team continues downstream along the runoff, and you go with them. The channel runs shallow across mineral crust, making delicate ripples that look harmless. You know better. You have seen water like this peel skin off a shin in a breath. The infrared sensor shows the channel's edges are warming. The geologist points out small fumaroles nearby, vents that are steaming more than usual. She explains that as pressure redistributes, steam can find new routes, emerging where there were no openings yesterday. You glance at the ground beside the boardwalk. It looks solid, pale, cracked like dried clay. It is also, in places, a thin crust over boiling water. The geologist describes the crust like a pastry shell. It forms from silica deposits, sinter, precipitating out of hot water as it cools. Over time, it can build hard surfaces, but it can also form thin bridges over channels, unsupported, fragile. It is strong until it is not, and you do not get a warning beep for crust thickness. You reach a section where the runoff skirts close to a boardwalk support post. The wood is stained darker, damp. You touch it with a gloved hand and feel warmth. Not scorching, but warm enough to make you imagine rot, weakening, failure. The geologist notices too, and she makes a note. Heat near infrastructure, she says, can warp boards, loosen bolts, shorten lifespan. Nature does not attack your construction out of malice. It simply refuses to accommodate it. You pivot back toward crowd management as more visitors arrive. The parking lot fills. The boardwalk becomes a slow river of people, families, tour groups, retirees with walking sticks, children with sticky hands, and all of them are walking over a living pressure system that has already proven it can fail today. You station yourself at a key junction because the thermal team is now spread out. One of them stays near the new vent crater, monitoring. Another heads toward a different cluster of features to check temperature changes. The geologist looks at you before she goes, and she gives you the part you were hoping not to hear. This pattern suggests a temporary reconfiguration, she says. It can last hours, days, sometimes weeks. You ask what that means operationally. She says, closures may need to expand. She says, more venting is possible. She says, in the way scientists say things politely, that you should not assume today's main event is over. You nod, because nodding is what humans do when they cannot argue with hot water. The crowd presses in again, curious about the closure. You explain it again, using the same calm tone until the words feel worn. Hydrothermal activity increased, you say. Area is unstable, you say. Stay behind the tape, you say. A man asks if he can smell the gas. Like that is a safety check. You tell him smell is unreliable because hydrogen sulfide can numb the nose. He looks offended that his senses are not authority. You suggest he trust the monitor clipped to your chest because it was built for disappointment. He laughs, and for a moment, the tension eases. Then a new sound threads through the normal hiss of the basin. A rapid series of tiny pops, too subtle for most people. You feel it more than you hear it, like faint tapping under the planks. You look down, then out, trying to triangulate. The geologist's seismometer, somewhere behind you, will be recording microquakes, small seismic events caused by fluid movement and fracture adjustments, the Earth's plumbing making room. You do not have access to that data in real time. You have your feet and your gut, and a boardwalk that occasionally trembles like it is unsettled. You call the geologist on the radio channel assigned for the incident. You tell her you feel subtle vibration near the junction, repeated tapping sensations. She answers after a moment, and you can hear her looking at an instrument screen. She says they are seeing a cluster of microseismic events. She says it aligns with fluid movement, likely associated with the earlier eruption. She says it is not unusual after an event like this. Then she adds the part that matters to you. If fluids are moving, she says, surface expressions can migrate. Cracks can open. New vents can appear, sometimes closer to boardwalks than anyone wants. You look at the long wooden path stretching through the basin. It suddenly feels very long. You make a decision that will annoy everyone. You ask for an additional ranger assigned to the far boardwalk segment, the one where temperatures have been trending up. Dispatch hesitates because staffing is not infinite. You insist anyway because the basin does not care about staffing either. They agree to send someone when available, which in ranger language means maybe. You keep people moving. You watch for anyone leaning over rails. You watch for children slipping on wet planks. You watch for people stepping off trail for a better angle, as if boiling water respects angles. You also watch the steam. Steam tells stories if you stop romanticizing it. A sudden thickening can mean a pulse of hot water. A change in smell can mean new gas. A plume leaning low can mean wind shift, bringing hazard toward people. Around midday, the sun warms the basin enough to lift some of the heavier gas pockets in a cruel twist that makes the air feel fresher. Visitors relax. You notice the relaxed posture first, shoulders dropping, phones coming back out, little smiles returning. You watch the same people who flinched earlier drift back toward the tape like it is a suggestion. You correct them with your body language, a half step forward, a hand out, a calm, firm voice. You tell them the closure is still active because the ground is still rearranging itself. You say it gently because gentle is faster than arguing on wet wood. You check your monitor again because comfort is not data. The numbers sit in the low range, teasing you into optimism. Then the wind pauses and the smell thickens in your nose. Not stronger everywhere, just in a low pocket near a boardwalk dip. You step around it, like you are avoiding a puddle that can suffocate you. The other ranger at the junction gives you a look that says, "Do we really have to keep doing this?" You answer with a look that says, "Yes, because physics does not get bored." The thermal team stays spread out, moving in short, careful bursts. They look like people hunting for invisible animals by reading footprints. And then your radio delivers the next decision, the kind that feels small until it is not. Dispatch asks if you can spare attention for a different segment, farther down the main loop. A boardwalk section near another cluster has reports of increased heat from a maintenance worker's handheld sensor. You do not have enough of you to be everywhere. You have one body, one set of lungs, and one monitor that only alarms where you are standing. So you do the only professional thing, you split the problem and accept worse coverage. You tell the law enforcement ranger to hold the closure line and the crowd. You tell the other ranger to stay at the junction and keep people moving. And you take the thermometer probe and head down the boardwalk toward the reported hotspot. Every step feels louder now because your brain has learned what the hollow sounds mean. Wood over void, wood over heat, wood over a plumbing system that does not need your permission. The boardwalk narrows between sinter mounds, white and crusty like old snow that never melts. Steam slips across your ankles, warm and wet, like a hand that does not belong to you. You pass a runnel of water crossing under the planks, and you feel the heat rising through gaps. You do not stop to admire anything. You are not here for admiration. You are here to see if the system is moving toward infrastructure again. Halfway to the reported spot, you feel it, a faint tremble, like someone tapping a pencil under the boards. It is not dramatic enough for tourists to notice. It is dramatic enough for you to hate it. You pause, not because pausing helps, but because listening is free. The tremble stops. Then it comes back in a cluster, a quick flutter that fades into the normal hiss. Microquakes, you think, or fluid hammering through a constriction. Water moving through fractures can sound like knocking because the rock is being asked to flex. Rock does not like flexing. It does it anyway because the alternative is breaking. You reach the section the maintenance worker mentioned. It looks like nothing. That is the first insult. A straight stretch of boardwalk, a railing, a view of shallow pools and gentle steam. Visitors stroll through, relaxed, pointing at colors like it is paint. You step to the side, staying out of the traffic flow, and you lower the thermometer probe toward the surface of a runoff channel near a support post. You do not have to dip it far. The display climbs faster than you want. The water is hotter than the same channel was last week, and hotter than it should be for this particular feature. You check again, because one reading is a rumor. The second reading agrees with the first, and that is when it becomes a problem. Hotter runoff near a post means heat near the wood, near bolts, near the points where humans trust the structure. Heat also means the source water may be changing, which means pressure is migrating. You look along the edge of the boardwalk, scanning the ground for new dampness. A fresh, wet sheen on mineral crust can be a leak. A leak can become a vent, and a vent can become an incident. You see a patch of sinter that looks darker than the rest, like someone spilled tea on it. It is small, but it is new. You crouch slightly, staying on the planks, and you stare at the patch until your eyes stop trying to make it harmless. A thin thread of steam rises from a hairline seam in the crust beside that dark spot. It is barely visible in the midday light. It is also exactly what you did not want to find. You bring the probe down toward the seam, not touching it, just hovering close enough to feel heat on the metal. The probe warms immediately, like it is being scalded. You do not need a number for this. You can feel it in your fingertips through your glove. You stand and you look up at the nearest visitors. A couple is leaning on the railing, eating trail mix, dropping shells of nuts into a pocket. A child is stepping side to side, tapping the boards with a shoe, because boredom is a universal force. You imagine the seam widening under the boardwalk edge, steam pushing up, and someone stepping off the planks for a photo. You take out your notebook and mark the location with a quick sketch and a description. Darkened sinter patch, new steam thread, heat near boardwalk support. Then you make the call you know you will hate later if you delay it. You radio the thermal geologist and give her the coordinates relative to the nearest named feature. You describe the new seam and the elevated runoff temperature. She answers after a pause, voice tight with focus. She tells you to keep visitors away from that edge, and she is sending a team member to verify. You ask if you should close this segment preemptively, She does not answer immediately because preemptive closures are political as well as physical. Then she gives you the soft version of yes. If the seam grows, she says, close it. If the heat increases, close it. If you smell stronger gas, close it. In other words, if you feel your instincts screaming, do not wait for permission. Congratulations, you have been authorized to be unpopular again. You turn to the visitors nearest the seam and ask them to keep moving along to the wider platform. You do it with a polite tone that implies routine maintenance, not danger. They comply because you look official and calm. You position yourself near the darker patch, not blocking the path, just occupying the space. Human bodies are excellent temporary barricades. You watch feet. You watch for anyone stepping off the boardwalk edge to let someone pass. You watch for a stroller wheel slipping near the seam. You keep your voice gentle, repeating the same phrases like a lullaby that prevents burns. Please stay centered on the planks. Please keep moving through this narrow section. Please do not stop here. Most people obey without thinking. One man stops anyway because he wants a selfie with the steam behind him. You step closer and tell him this is not a stopping point. He frowns, then steps away because your tone has the weight of paperwork. You look down at the seam again. The steam thread is still thin, but it pulses now, not steadily. A tiny exhale, then nothing, then another. You can almost match it to the faint tapping you felt earlier. Fluid pulse, fracture response, pressure negotiation. Not a show, just a system trying to find the easiest route. And the easiest route is often straight up. A thermal team member arrives, moving carefully, eyes scanning ahead of their feet. They carry a handheld infrared camera and they angle it toward the seam. The screen shows a bright line, hotter than the surrounding crust. They whistle softly, not for drama, but because heat maps have a way of making denial impossible. They take a few readings, then radio the geologist. You hear the summary through your own radio. Heat anomaly, linear feature, likely a new fracture vent. The geologist responds, voice clipped. She tells them to monitor for expansion and to check nearby runoff channels for redirected flow. She also tells you directly to be ready to close this boardwalk segment if anything escalates. You look up the boardwalk toward the crowd flow. Closing this segment means rerouting people, creating congestion, and increasing risk elsewhere. You are choosing between bad options. You decide to prepare the closure without triggering it yet. You pull cones from your pack and set them at a wide spot a short distance back where people can turn around safely. You do not block the path fully. You create a visual suggestion that something is different here. Then you call for another ranger to come assist with potential reroute. Dispatch replies with the sound of strained resources. They tell you someone is on their way, but it will take time. Time is the one resource the basin does not respect. You watch the seam again, then the runoff. The water in the nearby channel is now carrying a little more sediment, a faint cloudiness that was not there earlier. Sediment means disruption upstream, or new flow paths cutting fresh material. You crouch and take another temperature reading. It is slightly higher than 10 minutes ago. Slightly is how everything starts here. You feel your jaw tighten, and you force your face back into neutral. Visitors are watching you now, not because they understand, but because they see authority paying attention. A woman asks if something is wrong. You tell her there is increased thermal activity and you may need to reroute foot traffic. She asks if it is dangerous. You answer honestly, yes, which is why you are standing here telling her to keep moving. She nods, suddenly serious, and she guides her kids past without stopping. Good. Then the seam exhales harder, and you hear it, a faint hiss, like a kettle deciding to speak up. The steam thread thickens for a moment, then thins again. Your gas monitor does not alarm, but it ticks upward slightly, a quiet change that matters. You step upwind by a few feet, keeping your lungs out of the low pocket. The thermal team member mirrors you because even scientists enjoy breathing. You glance toward the horizon of Boardwalk and you see the line of visitors continuing to pour in. Midday is peak optimism. People are hydrated, fed, and convinced nothing bad will happen on a family vacation. You are the person who has to gently ruin that illusion in the name of skin preservation. Your assisting ranger finally arrives, slightly out of breath, eyes alert. You give them a fast briefing, scene vent, heat anomaly, possible closure. They nod and take position at the cone line, ready to redirect if you call it. You coordinate a simple plan. If closure becomes necessary, turn people back to the nearest junction, reroute to the wider loop, keep traffic one direction to prevent jams. You say it like it is easy. It is not. Because the boardwalk was not designed for sudden changes, it was designed for the fantasy of stable features. You take one more temperature reading at the seam edge. The number is higher again, now approaching the kind of heat that can warp wood over time and burn through shoe soles in seconds. You do not wait for the seam to become dramatic. You make the call. You tell your assisting ranger to initiate the temporary closure of this segment, effective immediately. They step into the flow and begin redirecting visitors with calm authority. You help, pointing people back toward the junction, repeating the same phrases. Temporary closure ahead. Please turn around here. Follow the boardwalk back to the junction. We will direct you. Please do not stop in the narrow section. Most comply because people are good at following confident directions. One man complains loudly about ruining his route. You let him complain while he walks, because walking is the goal. The closure reduces foot traffic over the seam area, and you feel a small relief. Then you notice the second problem. As people turn around, the boardwalk behind you begins to crowd. A bottleneck forms at the junction, and bottlenecks are how panic gets traction. You radio the junction ranger and warn them a surge is coming back their way. They respond with a tired acknowledgement, already managing questions and frustration. You keep the closure calm and controlled, and you watch the seam from your position. Without feet vibrating the planks, you can feel the subtle tremble more clearly. It comes in little bursts, then fades. The steam thread continues to pulse, occasionally thickening, then easing. It is not erupting. It is simply proving the system is still migrating. The thermal team member takes more infrared images, documenting the change. They place a small marker on the boardwalk railing, not touching the ground, a reference point for future comparison. The geologist will want a before and after, because science is mostly about proving you are not imagining things. You stand there for a while, holding the line, listening to the basin hiss. It would be almost meditative if you were not responsible for hundreds of soft bodies wandering through. After about 20 minutes, the seam seems to stabilize. The heat readings stop climbing. The steam thread remains, but it does not intensify. This is when humans try to reopen things too early. You do not. You keep it closed until the geologist gives you a direct instruction, because your job is not to restore convenience. It is to prevent the park from eating someone. Your radio crackles again, the geologist checking in. Her team near the original eruption crater reports reduced bursts, mostly steady venting now. She tells you the microseismic cluster is still active, but less intense than earlier. She says the system may be settling into a new flow pattern. May is doing heavy work in that sentence. She asks for your current readings and observations, and you report the seam vent, the heat anomaly, and the closure you initiated. She approves the decision, which is a rare treat. Then she tells you to keep monitoring until late afternoon, because changes often propagate slowly. Hydrothermal systems are not fast explosions all the time. They are slow shifts punctuated by violence. You acknowledge because acknowledging is all you can do. The afternoon drifts forward in a series of small tasks. You walk the closure lines, checking tape tension, checking signage, checking for people testing boundaries. You answer the same questions. Is it safe? Will it erupt again? Is this because of the supervolcano? You keep your answers simple, because simple is what people can hold. Hot water under pressure is shifting, you say. We are keeping distance to be safe, you say. Please stay on the boardwalk, you say. You drink water because dehydration makes you stupid, and stupid makes you fall. You eat something from your pocket that tastes like compressed cardboard, because this is not a romantic job. By mid-afternoon, the sun angle starts to change. Steam plumes become more visible again, not because they increased, but because the light catches them differently. Visitors begin to thin, slowly, as tour buses leave and families seek dinner. This is the part of the day when you should feel relief. Instead, you feel vigilance sharpen, because thinning crowds mean less social pressure keeping people on paths. Fewer witnesses means more rule breaking. And the basin likes to do its quietest, most dangerous work when people stop paying attention. Late afternoon brings the new evidence you were hoping not to collect. A radio call from the ranger posted near the main trail segment. They report a fresh steaming crack closer to a high-traffic boardwalk than anyone likes. Not erupting, they say, but definitely new. They describe it as a narrow line exhaling steam in short breaths, like the ground is practicing. You feel your stomach drop, not from fear, but from the tired irritation of being correct. The system is still migrating. You ask for details, location relative to the nearest named feature, approximate length, any discoloration, any odor. They answer as best they can, and you picture it in your mind. A new fracture vent, possibly connected to the microseismic cluster, possibly a stress release path. You radio the geologist with the update, and she responds quickly. She tells you to keep that area clear, expand the closure if needed, and she will send a team member to document. You start walking toward the reported crack, because your legs are the fastest thing you have. As you move, the basin feels quieter in a deceptive way. Less chatter, less footfall, more of the underlying hiss. You pass the original closure area, where the eruption crater continues to steam steadily. It looks calmer now, like a wound that has stopped bleeding but is still open. The mud around it has dried in patches, crusting over like scabbed clay. The tape flutters, still pretending it is a barrier. You keep going toward the new crack report. The boardwalk here runs near a shallow depression, and you notice steam pooling low again as the air cools. Not dramatic yet, but present. You check your monitor, and the readings are stable. Stable is not the same as safe. You reach the reported area and see the crack almost immediately. It is not a wide fissure. It is a thin seam in pale crust, perhaps the length of your forearm, darker at the edges where moisture condenses. Steam threads out in a delicate ribbon that looks harmless. The ranger on site points to it without stepping closer. They did the right thing. You kneel on the boardwalk, staying off the ground, and you look at the seam with the concentration of someone reading a threat. The seam is new because the crust around it is still clean, not stained by long exposure. The edges have not built up mineral deposits yet. It looks like a fresh cut in a surface that was already fragile. You bring the thermometer probe near it. Hovering, heat rises off it in a soft wave, enough to fog the probe briefly. You do not even dip it because there is no water visible. This is steam coming straight up from wherever it found space. You check the wind direction with your face, then your hand. The steam drifts sideways, low, threatening to pool in the depression nearby. You glance at your gas monitor again, and it ticks upward slightly. Not alarming, but trending. The worst part is how ordinary it looks. No explosions, no roaring, just a new place where the ground is exhaling. This is how people get hurt, by underestimating quiet change. You and the other ranger discuss closure expansion. If you close this segment, you create another reroute, another congestion point. You stand there doing the mental geometry of people, wood, and steam, and none of it feels like winning. You know the simplest move is to close the segment now, clean and fast. You also know the simplest move for you is often the worst move for a crowd, because reroutes create clumps, and clumps create shoves, and shoves create feet off the planks. So you choose the slow, tedious option, the one that feels like babysitting physics. You keep the boardwalk open for the moment, but you narrow behavior. You position yourself where the crack is visible, and you start moving people past in small waves. You speak softly, but you do not sound optional. You ask visitors not to stop here, not to lean, not to do the little sideways step that puts a boot on crust. And you watch their faces, because faces show you how much they will listen. A couple nods and walks on. A man pauses anyway, because he wants to see the steam come out of the earth like it owes him. You step into his line of sight and point to the boardwalk boards under his feet. You tell him the crack is new, and new means untested. He asks if it is going to erupt. You tell him you have no idea, and that is the point. He does not like that answer, but he moves. You glance down at your gas monitor again, and you watch the hydrogen sulfide number wobble. Not high, not screaming, just inconsistent, like a mood. In cool evening air, heavy gases behave like lazy water. They slip downhill, settle into low spots, and wait for lungs. Steam does not help, because steam hides the way air is moving. You feel the breeze stop for a few seconds, and your nose catches a thicker egg smell. It is not a dramatic stench. It is a concentrated pocket, like someone opened a jar near your face. You take one step upwind and the smell thins. That is how small the margin is. You look at the depression beside the boardwalk and you imagine it filling invisibly. If hydrogen sulfide rises enough, it can irritate eyes and throat. If it rises higher, it can knock out your sense of smell, which is a cruel feature. At still higher levels, it can drop you like a bad app crashing. And you would not get a heroic choking scene. You would get a quiet collapse onto wood, followed by paperwork. Congratulations. You would become a cautionary tale told at briefings. The other ranger shifts closer, mirroring your upwind position. They ask if you want to call for a full closure now. You look at the crack again, at how gently it exhales, and you think about the earlier eruption crater still steaming. You think about the seam vent you closed midday, and how the system is clearly shopping for exits. You think about tourists trying to beat sunset back to the parking lot, tired and careless. You make the call to tighten control without detonating the whole route. You radio dispatch and ask for portable signage, the kind that says, "Hazard ahead, do not stop." Dispatch says they will try, which means you will improvise. You pull out cones again, and you set them in a staggered line to keep people centered, not blocking passage, just guiding feet away from the crack side. You and the other ranger trade roles without saying it. One of you becomes the voice, the one talking people through. The other becomes the eyes, scanning for anyone about to do something clever. A teenager drifts toward the railing with a phone. The eyes catch it, and the voice corrects it. A man tries to step aside to let someone pass. You tell him to wait, and you let the narrow section act like a tunnel, one direction at a time. It slows everything down, and nobody likes it, which means it works. The crack keeps exhaling, a thin ribbon of steam that curls and dissolves. You watch the edges, looking for widening, for fresh dampness, for that subtle darkening that means heat is wetting new ground. The crack does not widen, but you notice something else. A tiny trickle of water is beginning to appear along the seam, clear at first, then slightly cloudy. It is not flowing like a stream, yet more like sweating. You crouch on the boardwalk and angle the thermometer probe toward the trickle without touching the ground. The metal warms fast, and the reading climbs into the range where skin does not get a second chance. This is not just steam anymore. This is water finding its way up, which means the plumbing below is pushing. The other ranger sees your expression change. They do not ask, because asking wastes time. You radio the thermal geologist on the incident channel, and you keep your voice level. You report that the new crack is now producing a small trickle of hot water, and the temperature is rising. You add that the air is getting heavier in the depression, with intermittent stronger odor pockets. The geologist answers after a pause, and you can hear her breathing through concentration. She tells you to close the segment if water is emerging, because water changes everything. Steam can be avoided with wind and distance. Water runs, and running water spreads hazard. You look down the boardwalk, then back toward the nearest junction. Closing this segment means reversing flow for anyone ahead and rerouting anyone behind. You do not have the staff for a graceful dance, but you do have a choice. You choose the choice that gets people away from the crack. You tell the other ranger to start turning people around at the nearest wide spot. You move up the line toward the junction, walking fast, and you begin the calm announcement. temporary closure ahead. Please turn back. Follow the boardwalk to the junction. You keep repeating it like a metronome for human feet. Some people groan. Some people argue. Most people just want to get to dinner, and dinner is a stronger motivator than science. You reach the junction and coordinate with the ranger there, who looks like they have aged a week today. You explain the new water trickle, the gas pockets, and the need to reroute. They nod and immediately start shifting the flow, sending visitors along alternate paths. The boardwalk becomes a slow conveyor belt of mild frustration, which is the best-case scenario, because frustration still moves. Panic sticks. As the crowd thins, you walk back toward the crack with fewer bodies in your way. The other ranger holds the closure line at the wide spot, acting as a polite wall. You stop at the crack again, and now you can see the trickle more clearly. It is carving a tiny channel along the crust, carrying fine, pale sediment. It looks delicate, like a miniature stream. It is hot enough to cook mussel. You watch where it wants to go, because water always announces the future. It is headed slowly toward the depression. You feel your mouth go dry. Hot water flowing into a low area means more steam, more humidity, and more gas trapping. It turns the depression into a bowl of invisible problems. You radio dispatch and request that the closure be extended farther back to keep anyone from wandering into that low pocket. Dispatch agrees, and you hear the tired acceptance in their voice. This is now a day of expanding no. You take a few steps back, staying on planks, and you just listen. The basin's hiss is constant, but now you hear subtle layering. A faint bubbling under the crust near the crack, a soft popping in the trickle as dissolved gases escape, and underneath it, the occasional low thump, distant like the earlier booms, but quieter. Not an eruption, a shift. The hydrothermal system is a network of fractures and cavities filled with hot water and steam. At Yellowstone, that heat comes from a shallow magma system, not at the surface, but close enough to warm groundwater brutally. Snowmelt and rain sink into the ground, percolate down through porous rock, and get heated. If that hot water stays under enough pressure, it can exceed the normal boiling point without turning to steam. It becomes superheated, which is a calm word for unstable. When pressure drops due to a fracture opening or water draining, that superheated water flashes to steam. The flash expansion is violent, and it breaks rock like brittle glass. That is a hydrothermal eruption. And you already watched one today. Now you are watching the quiet version, the system bleeding pressure through new cracks. This is how it avoids bigger explosions sometimes. Sometimes. There is always a sometimes. You and the thermal team member take photographs and measurements for the record. You do not do this for social media. You do it so tomorrow's ranger can know what changed and where to fear first. The thermal geologist arrives in person near the crack, stepping carefully, eyes focused. She watches the trickle for a long moment, then looks at the depression. She tells you, calmly, that this is consistent with migrating surface discharge. In human terms, the system is redirecting water to a new exit. It does not mean a bigger eruption is imminent, she says. It means the ground is actively changing. She says actively, and you appreciate the honesty. You ask if this new flow could undermine the boardwalk supports. She tells you It depends on how persistent the flow is and how hot. Hot water can soften and dissolve the silica crust that supports structures. It can also create new voids as it erodes sediment. Void plus wood equals sudden drop. Not a dramatic sinkhole, just a plank sagging until it is a trap. The geologist calls for a longer-term closure of this segment, at least until maintenance can inspect supports and thermal conditions stabilize. You relay that to dispatch, and dispatch says they will update signage and notify supervisors. You watch the sun angle drop lower, light turning warm and slanted. The basin looks prettier now, of course. It always looks prettiest when it is most deceptive. As visitors continue to leave, the emotional noise fades. Less chatter, less laughter, fewer footsteps. The boardwalk creaks more audibly under single walkers, like a ship settling as passengers disembark. You do another pass along the primary closure. Near the eruption crater. The crater still vents steam, steady, like a kettle left on low. The mud around it has crusted more, cracked in polygons like drying paint. You can see where debris landed earlier, little dark stones embedded in pale sinter, a reminder that even small events throw shrapnel. You check the gas monitor again near the crater, and the readings are lower now, but the air is cooling, and you know what that means. As temperature drops, air becomes denser and more stable. Stable air does not mix well. It layers, and when it layers, heavier gases stay low. The basin does not need high emissions to create a hazard. It just needs still air and a low spot. You walk toward one of those low spots, not entering it, just approaching the edge on the boardwalk. You watch the steam hug the ground like a living blanket. Your monitor ticks up, not alarming, but climbing. You take 2 steps back, and it drops again. That is the invisible geometry you work with. A few feet can be the difference between fine and headache, between headache and confusion, between confusion and collapse. You pass a sign that says stay on boardwalk, and you feel the urge to laugh. The boardwalk is not safe because it is boardwalk. It is safe because it is monitored, repaired, and sometimes closed. It is a negotiated truce between wood and heat. As you make your late afternoon rounds, you find the human hazards have not gone away. They have just become sneakier. A couple has stepped under tape near a side spur because the crowd is gone and they think rules are for daytime. They are standing on the crust, smiling, taking photos with nobody watching. You approach and you keep your voice quiet but heavy. You tell them they need to come back onto the boardwalk immediately. They laugh at first, embarrassed, then defensive. They say they are just stepping a little off. It looks solid. You tell them it always looks solid, right before it is not. You point, without stepping off yourself, to a patch of crust that looks slightly darker. You tell them that can mean thin ground or hot water close to the surface. You tell them if it breaks, it will not break like a gentle crumble. It will break like a trapdoor into boiling water. They stop smiling. They step back over the tape, suddenly careful with their feet. Congratulations, you have saved 2 strangers from learning about second-degree burns, the intimate way. They walk away, and you reset the tape, tightening it, because humans read slack as permission. You log the trespass in your notebook, not because you enjoy tattling, but because patterns matter. Where people like to step off, you need stronger barriers, or stronger presence, or both. The geologist and her team begin packing up some instruments as evening approaches. Some equipment will stay, like the seismometer, quietly listening overnight. You envy the seismometer. It does not have to explain itself to tourists. The geologist checks in with you one last time before she heads back. She tells you that the microseismic activity has declined, but not stopped. She tells you the heat anomaly near the earlier seam vent is still present. She tells you the new crack with water trickle is the most concerning shift for infrastructure. Then she says, the part that sits in your chest, the system is still adjusting, she says. It may do more tonight when nobody is watching. Because pressure does not care about visiting hours. You nod and thank her, because politeness is another kind of coping. Then, you resume your role as the last awake set of eyes on a place that never sleeps. Around 6:40 p.m., the basin has mostly emptied. The light is dimming, steam becoming a thicker visual again. The air cools enough that every exhale from you is visible, a small cloud joining larger ones. The boardwalk feels damp underfoot, and the wood smells like wet pine and mineral residue. You do your final sweep of the closures, checking that tape is still anchored, cones still upright, signs still readable. Wind picks up briefly, then dies, leaving the steam to settle. Your monitor chirps once, then again, with a tone that is not alarm, but not friendly. Hydrogen sulfide is creeping up in a low area near the main loop. You stop walking and just stand, letting the sensor sample the air. The reading rises slowly, then plateaus. Not enough to trigger an evacuation by itself. Enough to remind you that the basin is breathing heavier now. You take the upwind route, choosing higher boardwalk sections when you can. Even a foot of elevation can matter with heavier gases. Your job now is not to fix anything. It is to leave good information for the next shift, and to not become a victim of the quiet. You pass the milky spring again, the one that started this whole cascade. It is still milky. It is calmer at the surface now. Fewer dramatic heaves, but the water level remains higher than normal, and the runoff remains hotter than this morning. That tells you the plumbing change is not a momentary tantrum. It is a new setting. You take one last temperature reading, quick and careful. It is still elevated. You log it with a tired hand, ink smearing slightly because the paper is damp. You keep moving. At the new crack, the trickle is still present, and it has carved a longer, shallow runnel now. The depression nearby is foggier, steam pooling low like breath in a bowl. Your monitor ticks upward when you approach, and you stop well short. You do not need to see more to know this is an overnight hazard. You add a note in your notebook for maintenance. Water flow persists. Monitor gas and depression. Consider additional barriers. You say consider because you have learned that everything here is a negotiation. As you walk, your boots make dull thuds on wood, and the sound echoes faintly into empty steam. Without tourists, the basin feels larger, not geographically, but emotionally. It has more room to be itself. You begin to hear details you did not notice earlier. Tiny clicks as cooling mineral crust contracts. Soft burps of gas from pools the constant hiss of fumaroles, like 1,000 kettles left unattended. You check your monitor again, and you notice the pattern of intermittent warnings. Not sustained, not dramatic, just persistent. That is how gas hazards often work here. They do not announce themselves like a villain. They simply accumulate. Hydrogen sulfide, carbon dioxide, sometimes methane in trace amounts. Carbon dioxide is especially rude because it is odorless. It can pool in low spots and displace oxygen quietly. People think of carbon dioxide as a climate thing, a distant global concept. Here it is personal. It is a blanket that makes you sleepy forever. You step around a low dip in the boardwalk and you watch steam pour into it. You think of it like a bathtub filling, not with water, with air that is not fit for you. You keep your route tight and efficient because lingering is how you get complacent. You reach the edge of the main visitor area where electric lights begin to glow through trees. The warmth of human infrastructure feels obscene after a day of raw heat. It is warm, controlled, and falsely reassuring. You walk toward the ranger station, and you realize your shoulders have been tense for hours. You loosen them slightly, not because the job is over, but because you are still alive. Inside the station, the air smells like old coffee and wet jackets. You sit at a desk with your battered notebook and begin writing the official version of the day. The incident report wants times, locations, observed effects, actions taken. It wants the story flattened into boxes. You comply because bureaucracy is how organizations remember. You write about the milky spring, the pre-dawn temperature rise, the thumping convection. You write about the underground booms felt to the boardwalk. You write about the off-trail hydrothermal eruption, steam and water blast, debris thrown, minor scald injuries. You write about gas monitor spikes, hydrogen sulfide rising briefly and intermittently after. You write about closure establishment, crowd control actions, and law enforcement support. You write about the museum vent and the midday heat anomaly near boardwalk supports and your decision to close that segment preemptively. You write about the late afternoon new crack closer to a main trail and the emergence of hot water trickle and the expanded closure. You write about the persistent nature of the changes, elevated